The morning tallies came in like a thunderclap. Moscow's invasion force lost another 1,730 troops in a single day, along with 6 tanks and 33 artillery systems, in a war that has already devoured more than 1 million Russian personnel by Ukrainian estimates. The number is both staggering and grimly familiar, evidence that this conflict grinds onward with the slow, relentless pressure of tectonic plates. This is today's picture from the front, and tonight we're pulling you into the full frame. The losses, the strikes, the drones, the shifting lines, and the rumble of NATO on guard across the continent. Let's start with the headline itself. Ukraine's general staff says Russian forces have bled another 1,730 personnel in the past 24 hours. Those losses came bundled with equipment attrition that would make any Soviet-era quartermaster wince. 6 tanks eliminated and 33 artillery pieces silenced. Since the full-scale invasion began on February 24, 2022, Kyiv counts Russia's overall losses at roughly 1,192,350 personnel, plus 5-figure hits across armour and artillery. The day-by-day updates aren't just scoreboard chatter. They're a barometer for the tempo of combat operations, the health of Russia's assault cycles, and the strain on Ukraine's own defenders. The numbers come with the usual caveat that they're produced by a combatant and not independently verified, but they are consistent with a pattern we've watched for months. Russia pushing, Ukraine absorbing, and attrition grinding at industrial scale. Context matters. This war has phases like a long winter. When Russia tries to surge, it leans on massed artillery and infantry-heavy assaults. When those attacks stall, it compensates with drones and missiles aimed at Ukraine's logistics and power grid. Conversely, Ukraine counters with precision strikes deep in the Russian rear. Oil infrastructure, air bases, and ammunition dumps, designed to raise Moscow's costs and make the battlefield feel very, very close to home. And it did feel close to home. In Russia's Rostov region, a wave of Ukrainian drones set a cargo ship ablaze and left 3 people dead, according to regional authorities. The attack struck Rostov-on-Don and nearby Bataysk, extending a now routine contest for airspace that no longer respects distance on a map. Fires were extinguished, officials said, but the message remained. The rear isn't safe. The rear is just farther away, and drones don't care about mileage. Southwest along the Black Sea, Odessa absorbed yet another set of Russian strikes. A woman driving across a bridge was killed, her 3 children injured, and the region's power supply took another hit. Hours later, Ukraine's energy ministry reported around 180,000 consumers without electricity across several regions after overnight attacks. It's the latest chapter in a winter playbook we've seen before. Pressure the grid, sap the morale, force Ukraine to spend its precious resources keeping the lights and the heat on. The cruelty is familiar, the resilience too. Crews worked through the fallout as officials begged residents not to choke the roads in protest, but to let repairs proceed. The battlefield runs straight through power substations now. Then there's Krasnodar Krai, where debris from drone strikes hit the Slavyansk-na-Kubani oil refinery and knocked out power to tens of thousands. Local authorities said 2 high-voltage lines were damaged and fires broke out at refinery infrastructure. Moscow's defense ministry, as always, claimed it shot down most of the attacking drones. The scorched pipelines told a different story. There's a reason Ukraine keeps threading drones toward fuel nodes. War runs on diesel and kerosene. Interrupt the flow, and every engine from a T-72 to a caliber launcher complains. If you're still watching, by the way, you're exactly the kind of viewer this channel is built for. The detailed, patient ones who don't just want explosions, you want consequences. So consider subscribing now so you don't miss the next breakdown. Let's get back to how this changes the game. On the ground in Donetsk, the fighting remained intimate and savage. Ukraine's forces reported eliminating Russian assault groups that had slipped into Siversk amid foul weather. Fog and snow that turned drones sluggish and infantry reckless. Moscow has trumpeted claims about the city for days. Kyiv insists it's holding and that infiltrations are being hunted down inside the urban grid. Winter is a cheater's paradise. Bad skies, short days, and plenty of broken cover. It's also the season when training and small unit discipline matter more than flags on maps. Further north, Kupiansk became the week's most contested headline. Ukraine says it controls nearly 90% of the town after pushing Russians out of northern districts. Russia predictably denies it. Independent verification is scarce, fog of war thick, but the narrative arc is clear. Ukraine clawing back blocks, cutting supply threads, and tightening a vice on Russian units that once seemed comfortably entrenched along the Oskil River. If confirmed, that's more than a morale boost. Kupiansk is a logistics hinge, and hinges decide how doors swing. Swing east to the Dnipro's lower reaches, and the storylines converge into a single word: heat. Kherson's heat, specifically. Russian artillery shelled the city's combined heat and power plant roughly 100 times, according to Ukrainian regional officials, making restoration extremely difficult and leaving tens of thousands without warmth in mid-December. There's no military logic more cynical than hitting a city's radiators when the thermometer drops, but that's exactly the point. If the battlefield is everywhere, then morale is fair game. So what do these daily casualty figures? 1,730 soldiers, 6 tanks, 33 guns, actually mean in the broader campaign? Think of Russia's offensive machine like a piston engine. It requires manpower, armour, artillery tubes and ammo. Burn through any one of those too fast and the engine knocks. Ukrainian reporting suggests the engine is knocking. Stockpiles of vintage artillery are still vast, and Moscow has found creative ways to import components and shells. But barrels wear out, and crews do too. Meanwhile, drones are the new spark plugs. Cheap, numerous, and increasingly accurate. The battlefield keeps rewarding the side that can keep them in the air. That brings us to the drone war, the breathless, buzzing soundtrack of 2025. On almost any given night, one side is trying to thread a corridor through the other's electronic warfare, while the other side tries to swat the incoming with jammers, guns, and soft kill tricks. Rostov, Slavyansk na Kubani, Odessa, different targets, same grammar. Attrit fuel, stress grids, bleed repair teams, force commanders to choose between shoring up the rear and supplying the front. It's the everywhere front line, and it's here to stay. At the strategic level, Kyiv's commander-in-chief, Alexander Syrsky, framed the moment with a brutal arithmetic. Russia has expanded its deployed force in the theatre to about 710,000 troops to sustain strategic offensive operations. That's a staggering mass, bigger than many NATO armies combined, and it explains why daily losses in the low thousands can feel, perversely, sustainable for the Kremlin. It also explains Ukraine's insistence on long-reach strikes. If you can't thin the ranks fast enough at the trench line, you starve the front by hitting its tail. Now, zoom out to Brussels. While missiles and drones crisscross the night, Europe is wrestling by daylight with the money question. EU leaders are debating a plan to leverage frozen Russian sovereign assets, hundreds of billions parked largely at Euroclear in Belgium, to bankroll Ukraine's survival and reconstruction through a reparations loan. Legal teams are chewing nails, central bankers are nervous, politics is messy. But the signal is unmistakable. Europe is searching for permanent financing streams, not just emergency drip feeds, to outlast the Kremlin's appetite. The longer the war runs, the more fiscal endurance becomes strategy. NATO, for its part, has been busy in all the quiet ways that make headlines only after crises. Foreign ministers reaffirmed sustained support for Ukraine earlier this month, while the alliance ran Freezing Winds, a Baltic Sea exercise focused on sea lines of communication and critical infrastructure, exactly the arteries Russia likes to threaten with subs, mines and sabotage. Training isn't newsy, readiness is. And the subtext for Moscow is simple. The alliance is drilling on the places that would matter on day one of a bigger war. Let's cut back to Earth level. On Ukraine's eastern ridges, The weather is becoming a combatant in its own right. Mud and ice slow vehicles, smother drones in rhyme, and funnel attacks into narrow, risky alleys. The clever units steal advantage in the grey zones, urban seams, industrial parks, tree lines, where small teams matter more than armour columns. Every successful infiltration, every repelled raid, is a tiny referendum on training, morale, and leadership. Siversk's cat and mouse fight captures that truth perfectly. A handful of squads slipping in under fog, only to be isolated, fixed, and destroyed when the weather gives the defenders back their sight. If this sounds like a postmodern Verdun played with quadcopters and Starlink, that's because it is. Meanwhile, Russia's continued nightly strikes on Odessa and the wider grid remind us that energy is a target set, not a civilian afterthought. Each blast forces Kyiv to move crews, secure generators, and triage neighborhoods. It's a war of kilowatts and patience. And yet, as in the past 2 winters, Ukraine's electrical engineers look suspiciously like a branch of special forces, patching lines under fire, improvising around cratered substations, and bringing neighborhoods back online just when the cold hits hardest. If there were medals for grit in high-voltage gloves, Odessa's crews would need bigger jackets. Let's talk hardware, because the daily kill counts hide a deeper erosion. Artillery is a consumable in 2 ways: shells and tubes. Replace the shells, and you still need barrels that haven't been shot out. Replace the barrels, and you still need crews who aren't exhausted. On a day where Ukraine reports 33 Russian artillery systems destroyed or disabled, the headline number is flashy, but the quiet damage accrues in the logistics chain. Machine shops swamped with maintenance, replacement guns diverted from other sectors, fresh crews sent forward who've had more time on a simulator than a firing line. Attrition is the accountant that never sleeps. Of course, numbers alone don't win wars. Strategy does. Ukraine's decision to keep striking oil facilities across southern Russia is part of a clear theory. Make it expensive for Moscow to fuel the war, literally. Every refinery sputter forces alternate routing, truck convoys, and rail cargo that must be protected, which in turn thins out air defenses and troops elsewhere. The same logic applies to hitting ports and ships at Rostov. Force the Russians to defend depth with breadth, and you stretch them thin at the very moment they want to concentrate. And what about the politics under the hood? Russian media trumpets gains around Pokrovsk and insists Ukrainian counterattacks are pinpricks. Kyiv highlights advances near Kupiansk and calls Russia's threats in Siversk informational operations. On both sides, propaganda is not a sideshow, it's a force multiplier. But concrete outcomes are harder to spin. A refinery fire is a refinery fire. A blacked out district is a blacked out district. A functioning heat plant either exists or doesn't. That's why today's verified beats matter. They're small, factual anchors in a storm-tossed narrative sea. So where is this headed? In the near term, more of the same. But the same now includes a Europe that's bending policy to make money flow, and a NATO that's drilling the choke points. If Brussels locks in the reparations-backed loan, Ukraine gets breathing room. If not, the winter will feel colder and longer. Either way, the alliance has signaled it will keep the training pipelines warm, and maritime exercises like freezing winds are a reminder that the Baltic, the North Sea, and the GI-UK gap are being watched with the kind of focus you reserve for places that keep your lights on. Let's end where we began, with that single-day loss figure. Imagine a country-sized factory that builds infantry squads and artillery crews as fast as it can, then feeds them into a front that eats them faster still. It's morbid, but it captures the central dilemma for Moscow. Mobilization can fill trenches, but it can't conjure maneuver competence overnight. The same goes for Ukraine. Western aid can buy shells and air defenses, but not time. Time is bought, expensively, on the front line by soldiers who stop one more assault and by engineers who reconnect one more feeder line before the frost sets in. If casualty figures were a stock, Moscow would be demanding a trading halt. If drones were a language, both sides would be speaking it fluently by now. If Europe needed a test of will, it has one, with a price tag and a deadline. Today's count, 1,736,33, will be replaced tomorrow by new numbers, but the meaning will remain. Ukraine is still standing, still striking, still adapting. Russia is still pushing, still losing at a rate that should terrify any planner who studies curves. And NATO is still awake, watching the seas, counting the days, and preparing for the kind of future where readiness is the only peace offering that deters war. This war was never going to be short, but in the long wars of history, it's the side that marries endurance with adaptation that wins. The endurance is obvious. The adaptation is unfolding in real time, on the ground in Kupiansk, in the air over Rostov, in the circuits of Odessa's substations, and in the meeting rooms of Brussels. And that's the story tonight. A battlefield that keeps changing shape, a set of numbers that keep pointing the same way, and a continent that's learning, again, how to balance fear with resolve. As always, we'll close with the question you should carry into tomorrow. If a million small decisions decide the outcome of this war, from a drone operator's choice of flight path to a prime minister's vote on a loan, how many of those decisions can Ukraine and its partners get right before the winter ends? Because every day the ledger updates, and every day the war asks the same thing of both sides: adapt, endure, or break.